Alright, so this is my presentation that I sort of made over the break. It's basically on character design. So, does anyone remember this? Has anyone seen like the Pokemon show before? Like,
Yeah.
So yeah, like who's that character? That's my presentation.
Who is that character?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always Ditto, so might as well. But just wanted to talk about some specific type of games, especially these kind of team-based, class-based games. So first of all, what's a team-based game? Team-based actually started off with sports, of course, like soccer. I think the first team-based game was called Su Chu, which was in ancient China in 3000 BC. It's essentially soccer. It's soccer. Yeah, but in those kind of games, like what's like the plus, what's the pros you get to see? You get to see like team spirit, and like everyone on the team has like a common objective to like get the ball to the other side, or yeah, etc. And in addition to those, there's also like some ways that you have to distinguish between the teams. So there's colors like jerseys and stuff like that. So there's a lot of team-based games. Like it's not hard to imagine, kind of like any Madden game or like NFL, or like hockey. Like all those sports are these team-based games. So I'll be moving on to class-based games. So what are classes? Classes are basically different gameplay styles and different roles that you have on a team. So the origins of class-based games are in role-playing games. And the first role-playing game is, of course, Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know the date, but maybe 3000 BC, who knows? But it was interesting because in Dungeons and Dragons, the first classes were the fighter, the mage, and the cleric. So you had like one character, the fighter would be, has a lot of physical strength, and while the mage has a lot of magic. Both do damage, but like they're in like two different parties. Like there's magic damage and there's like physical damage. And the cleric is usually like the healer. Other games call them medics or bards, stuff like that. Well, apparently according to Wikipedia, bards are like a hybrid class, or whatever that means. And later on, interestingly, there was a fourth class added, which was the thief. And ever since then, there's been more classes added to Dungeons and Dragons, and now there's like 12 or so. But a lot of these classes are like a mixed match between these. For example, the bard, which I just mentioned, like the person who plays music, is apparently like a hybrid between the cleric and the thief. I don't know why. Maybe music is sneaky or something like that. So yeah, so in these class-based games, it started off with a team-oriented origins, basically. So whenever these video games started to come out, and these video games tried to incorporate this kind of a team aspect, like team-based games where it's like a team versus another team, while having these classes. Originally, there was a game called Star Seas Tribes back in 1998. So here, the only classes that they had were actually just 3 different types that your character could be, which was light, medium, or heavy, which all dialed on how much damage your weapon did, and also dialed back on like how much health you had. So, for example, the heavy one had like a heavy hitting weapon, and you were also tanky. However, you were very slow, while the light like zip around. Yeah, and in this game, it was in the time of era where a lot of games had very high mobility, like Quake and those kind of games, where people would be zipping around. I think there's a GIF right here. Yeah. So essentially, the only reason you could tell this person was like on the other team was because of this little like red arrow on top of him, like, and this other like photo, like you just tell these are allies just because of red arrows, green arrows, enemies are red, etc. However, there was a game that predates this, and there's a game that had a class-based, team-based shooter, but has a long history coming after that. And that game was Team Fortress. It was a Quake mod. Quake was a separate game that had high mobility, such as the GIF shown before. And as you can see, as a modification of that game, every other character has the same face. Like, these are all the same character models, but they just gave them different clothes so that you could distinguish which class they are, which role they are. They ended up having about 9, arguably 10 classes in Quake's Team Fortress. And what's also interesting in this game is that instead of using arrows, such as like red arrows and green arrows, they used more of a jersey system, where the red team and the blue team were distinguished by the colors of their like uniforms here. So I think there's some screenshots. So yeah, for example, you can tell that this person is clearly on red, while this little speck here is on blue, and I don't know, like you can tell that's pretty much red as well. It's honestly, I don't know. You guys tell me if it's like hard or easy to tell whether A, you walk by a person, B, you walk by an ally or an enemy. There's a short clip here. Oh yeah, sorry, violent images. There's blood spatter and stuff, so. Yeah, and that's a very important point you just made, because a lot of games back then, like Quake and stuff, it was all about that adrenaline rush. It'd be like zipping across the whole map, like everyone was fast. Even the slowest character would like clear the whole span of the map in a few seconds. But yeah, when it comes to readability, when you want to read which kind of characters you just pass by, if you pass by a sniper or if you pass by a medic, it was very hard to tell because A, everyone had the same body shape, and B, like you had to look at the textures on that little body shape as you were zipping by really quickly. So a few years later, there was, I think, Valve incorporated a team who made that modification and made Valve's own Team Fortress Classic. So this game was designed specifically for Team Fortress now, unlike the mod, which was just a modification of a pre-existing game. So Team Fortress Classic started off looking like this. As you can see, there's differences between the red and blue team, but they also went through a remodeling stage where they remodeled it into these kind of models. So everyone has this some sort of like futuristic kind of thing, like you can see like a visor here. But the problem is, again, if you're zipping across the map, would you be able to tell like who you passed or like which team that person was? So here's a screenshot. So you can clearly see that the engineer here, like number one, he's an engineer because of this bright yellow hat. And number two, that he's on the red team because it's all red. However, this guy back here, I don't know who he is. He kind of blends with the background, and like there was a lot of this camouflage. If you just look back here too, a lot of these uniforms have that camouflage in them, and I don't know, they never said specifically in their development logs or anything, but I wonder if some of these designs were kind of intentional, because these classes are the Sniper and Spy respectively, which are both classes that have to deal with stealth and like trying to hide and stuff. However, as a readability standpoint, it's very hard to tell who this character is when you walk by them, and it's very hard to tell whether they're on your team or the opposite team. So here's a short gameplay. Again, very fast. So yeah, well, I mean, lots of blood spatter again, but anything you guys noticed, anything you guys wanted to like point it out? I wanted to point out was here.
When you're aiming,
Hmm.
it has like a red sort of,
Oh.
there's like a red cross, like, I don't know what to call it.
Like a reticle?
Like when you walk in on a target, I guess.
I wonder. So I wonder if that's like a hurt animation. Like since he got hurt from the front, usually a lot of games, like when you get hurt, there's like a circle.
Oh, okay.
So like if you get hurt from the back, like it highlights back here.
Oh, I thought that was because you were aiming at somebody. That would help, that you can know if you're aiming at, a certain enemy or.
Yeah, definitely. But here, yeah, I think it's because he got hurt from like the front. But this character here, I wanted to point out because when zooming across, I didn't know if this person was red. It just looked gray. And like once you stop and look at it, you can say, yes, this guy is on the red team. Look at this red hat. But like when you're zooming across in a concrete wall with like a gray shirt, it's sometimes hard to tell. So a lot of games, like these games, kind of also rely on if you're on the red side of the map or if you're on your home side. So like if you're on the home side, even if you do see a gray guy, you would expect them to be on your team because it's just on your side of the map. But however, as a readability standpoint, there can be improvements to be made. And one of the developers actually did point out Team Fortress Classic was made in 3 months. So they didn't have, like, the reason why they have several models was because, like, the first release, whenever they released in 1999, they were kind of rushed. They didn't have that polish. And when they did add polish, it was like some polish to, like, some of the faces. You could see, like, oh, like a grumpy old man there. But like, again, with the readability, you still have that problem with the camouflage, which is kind of important in a class-based game because you want to tell if the person who passed you was like a light scout, that's probably not a problem back there, or if the person that zipped by you was like a guy with a rocket launcher who could do like a lot of damage behind your back. But, so, after Team Fortress Classic, there came Team Fortress 2. Brotherhood of Arms. This wasn't a release game. However, there was a teaser. I think this was around 2000. And as you can see, like they still kept their camouflage game. Arguably, they stepped even further into the camouflage game. They were like having, I think it was like the Vietnam War or so. They had a trailer for it, and this is what it looked like. I muted the audio because it was just gunshots and sirens. So, but as you can tell, there's a person back there that you don't even notice. I mean, like, again, it's the spy, so it's like maybe you want that kind of stealth kind of thing. But like in a game, it can feel frustrating, especially if you just walk by a guy that you couldn't see and could do high damage. But yeah, so after releasing this later on in the development, they decided to scrap this realistic look. They decided to just start all over again. So about in 2003, there were some leaked files, and this was, people called it Team Fortress Invasion. This again wasn't released, but this was a totally different game. There were assets, and later on they went back to explain in this kind of game, it wasn't just a class-based, team-based game. It was also a game that like counted resources. Like every time you killed someone, you'll have to collect the resources, and then like you like spend resources on something. So like there's an element of real-time strategy within this first-person shooter game. In addition to that, every character on on the two teams had completely different models. Like for example, these two were the same class called the Commando class, which was a class they actually added that were in the previous Team Fortresses. But they don't look the same. Like they have totally different body types, and unless you really knew the game, you wouldn't have known that they had the same roles.
Do you know if the hitboxes were different?
I think they tried to make it consistent, but again, this wasn't released. These were just models found. So again, and there was some more concept art they later released. Again, the human side of the pyrotechnic guy, and the alien version of the pyrotechnic guy. But this was around 2003, but again, this wasn't ever released. So then Valve went silent again, which Valve does quite often. But later, they opened up with this. This shocked the world, or those who are paying attention at least. Those who are following the game didn't even expect this kind of an art style. This totally different, blocky, like cartoony, like even the song, like you could, all that serious like camouflage and all that army stuff is totally gone. Yeah. All of this is like beta footage as well, so they actually kind of look better. When they actually release the game, you see these models that are in the screen in front of you. And right now, these models, even after a decade, people still recognize some of these characters, and they became just iconic video game characters that are going to be cemented throughout the rest of history. So, how did they do this? Why did they do this? Well, alright, so first of all, here's some images of the gameplay. So this time, you could clearly see like the different colors. The blue stands out from the brown, and even the red team doesn't have the same colors as the walls. There's no one who's like gray, for example. And you could tell even who you are, because you could see like just by your hand, like you are on the red team. Yeah, and I don't know, it's just a lot more clearer than before because of all these like colors that pop out, and some other design aspects that they paid attention to. Here's just some gameplay. This is from a competitive match, so some of the UI elements aren't in the actual game. It's just because people are casting this game.
It's really hard to get out of the doors now, I'm saying. So thanks a lot, buddy. Making it even harder, but...
Yeah, we have LG trying to move up this scope pick, but they get forced on the heavy through the door, and KBK just popped pretty quickly in return of a class.
So you can tell you're on the blue side of the map as well, because even the floors are a shade of blue. And like every character doesn't share that same color. Just because the wall is blue and that you're blue, there are different shades so that you can clearly tell which character that you're a character, not just someone on the wall. So there was a GDC talk made by the developers of Team Fortress 2 talking about their art style. And this is basically what I gleaned from their PowerPoint. And three main points that I found were, number one, the color choices that they made, number two, the shading, and finally silhouettes and like the shapes that they decided to use. So first of all, with the colors, with the color palette, they had a clear palette for the two different teams. So like even the yellow is like a different shade of yellow between red and blue. And for example, the medic, last time in the previous games, medics were just white. However, this time they're white with a shade of red and a shade of light blue, so you could tell clearly, even though the majority of the medic is a light color, you could tell which team he is on. Shading. They actually spent a lot of time focusing on mimicking the art style of early 20th century artists. So these, especially Liam Decker, but these artists are the ones that they noted in their GDC talk. So specifically what they noted were, number one, rim shading, or basically at the outlines, instead of having thick, dark outlines, as you can see in like cel-shaded games such as Borderlands, this is the opposite effect, where the borders are actually lighter than the actual like color inside. They also try to put accents on silhouettes by using lines on their clothing, such as clothes folds. And finally, when they're talking about flesh and like skin tones, they use red terminators, or i.e., whenever there was a shadow on someone's face, they used this like a tint of red instead of just a darker color. And yeah, I don't know. Can you guys see the resemblance? I don't know. But yeah, those were the points that they made when designing their characters. Alright, and finally, with the shading. They actually went a step further because they wanted to naturally drag the player's eyes towards the important part of the character model, which was their weapon. Especially in these class-based games, you want to see which weapon they're wielding, because that's usually what's represents of which class they are. So for example, this is Pyro, who wields a flamethrower. However, you can see like on their hazmat suit kind of thing, their legs are much darker than their chest, because the chest is where they hold the flamethrower. So yeah, even without lighting, you can tell like they're trying to accent this core body. So when they are wielding like a weapon, you could clearly see like which weapon they are wielding. Alright, so about shapes. When they first started developing this new art style for Team Fortress 2, they mentioned how they almost went for like a claymation style. So it was like a basic kind of body build. As you can see here, like some of the concept art, like just a standard man, just standard rectangle. However, when they started to stylize it, they tried to make different shapes. You can see like some kind of like an hourglass kind of shape on the same character, and then they tried to remake it several times. They had they mentioned with Demoman, which is this character, they had issues of almost having him look too similar like the other characters. So they tried different body types, and then later on went with this kind of like a square profile on the top of his torso. So yeah, this was just trying to find a unique shape so you could tell that this is Demoman, not any of the other characters. So finally, this was the design that they had for Demoman. However, this isn't the person you see in game. No, because they felt like it was too close to like any other Scottish stereotype, just any drunk Scottish man, angry man. So they changed some features of this character, and then just did some last like design editing and stuff. It's just fascinating. They have their whole post on, like it's a pretty long post on just this one character. And finally, they have the Demoman you see in the game. So when you see this character now, and then you see these silhouettes, hopefully you'll be able to tell which character this person is. So I mean, if you guys want to, like, just shout it out. Which one do you think this guy is?
The one on the top right.
Oh yeah, which one?
Like,
This guy? Yeah, you're right. Exactly. So this was the amount of detail and amount of care that they put in so that you could distinguish these characters from each other. Because when you zoom past them, you want to know like which character they are. You want to know basically which class they are. So a lot of games have been inspired by TF2 by not just all these shapes and stuff, but because of all their memorable characters, which comes with silhouettes. In fact, a lot of characters, when you look at their silhouettes, are almost instantly recognizable. These are just random characters like television, cartoon characters here. And I don't know if you would be familiar with all of them, but yeah. I think there are some notes about silhouettes in particular where they kind of look into the symmetry of the design and also look at basic shapes that you use in the design, because once you have a design that's too complex, for example, it's hard to distinguish that from another complex design. So these are all games that came out in 2016. One came out in 2015 and then released on 2017. So real quickly, just another interactive thing just to wake you guys up. How many games do you think are on the screen right now?
Let's see, I think I already see a couple from Overwatch. Because you have Lucio, which is third from the left and the bottom. Is that Zarya in the top
Yeah,
left?
those are
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't play Overwatch, so I wouldn't know. Second to the top left, that doesn't look, I don't know. Maybe Battle Rate? I don't know.
Well, I mean, like, you don't have to name.
I don't know.
like, game,
I don't know,
like-
I'd say 2.
Is that Pyro in top
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's great that you guys are able to like name names, because that means that just basically proves how well they've done in designing their characters. But yeah, in the total there's 4 games here. Yeah, I didn't care to put the actual photos. They're just silhouettes here.
You gonna leave his name with that?
Well, I mean, I do show some. So the 4 games here are Overwatch, Battleborn, Paladins, and Gigantic. Gigantic is the one that's actually not a first-person shooter, that's actually a third-person shooter. Well, not a shooter, but just a third-person game. And I wanted to express that first. This is Gigantic. This is their character design. And just right off the bat, you can tell the cartoony like character design that they have. They had a whole other presentation, it's also in the references, but for every character, Gigantic tried to choose a shape, and then they tried to choose a bold idea with the shape, and just built upon that. So for example, this guy here has this like curved triangle shape that you can see on his face, on his claw, and like all throughout his armor. For example, this character here has a bow, thus like his fur, his tail is all curved outwards like the bow. And the assassin class, like you can see her like shirt pant thing is like the same shape as her hoodie. Like Gigantic was very popular for their very distinct art style, and arguably very memorable characters just by looking at the art style. And with the art style also comes animation. So this is just a gif of 3 of their characters, but just by looking at their animation, it goes along with the rest of their arts, whatever their art was based on. So for example, the guy with the bow with the curves jumps in arcs. The assassin who has like sleek daggers, like does whatever that is. So yeah. And of course, a lot of other games do this as well. Overwatch is also very well known to have a lot of polish in their animations. And this next game that I'm about to talk about is Battleborn. Battleborn also has all these animations and stuff, but Battleborn also had an emphasis on effects. So every time you do like an attack, every time you do a move in Battleborn, you have a flashy effect that comes with it. The thing with Battleborn though, however, even though they tried to emphasize effects, people do say that there might be some downsides to that because of so many effects. For example, some people say that it might clutter up the screen. So just if you guys want to see for yourself, like every enemy has an effect, you have an effect. It's a very bright game, but yeah. And what's also interesting to note here is that in games like these, they actually didn't use the jersey system that Team Fortress does. Instead, they went back to what tribes did with the green and red arrows, or here, the green and red health bars, just to tell who's on your team or who's on their team. So, yeah, that's Battleborn. Yeah, and like every game has their own style, like every game has their own taste, own personality to it. And in fact, Overwatch does this as well. Overwatch, whenever they want to emphasize importance, they glow. For example, this character could get charged. The more they charge up, for example, the more powerful they are, the more heavy damage that they put out. And you can see, like, her suit glows the more she's charged. But it's not just characters like these. Almost every other character glows. Like, the healer also glows. Like, even random characters that don't need to glow. Why? But, I mean, it's all part of the character, all part of recognizing where that character is. And one of the worst, offenders, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but like something that's very important that they want to point out are shields. Every shield glows, and like every explosion also glows. So it could also be very visually cluttering. In fact, that's why when Overwatch tried to jumpstart its competitive scene in the Overwatch League, they started assigning team colors, so it'll look more like this. Again, you can see with the health bars being used, but there's also team colors. If you see, like, the glow here is blue and everyone else is white. So, yeah, like, you can see some of the team jersey aspect of team recognition coming into play here. So, let's see, what am I talking about afterwards? Alright, so just going back to classes. I know I'm going a little over time right now, but I'll try to wrap this up real quickly. So classes, going back to D&D, the first three classes that they had were the mage, the fighter, and the cleric. Arguably, very loosely, you could call these kind of classes of a sort of an offensive class, a defensive class, and a support. And these were the classes that they used to delineate the Team Fortress classes. However, I mean, if you look at the characters separately, like, only this character heals, like, these two don't. And actually a lot of people do question about the design of, like, why is the sniper a support class? Like, or why is, like, the highest damage class, like, on defense instead of offense? Team Fortress in their wiki page has actually explained their choices in doing these. The offensive role is supposed to, like, poke in, is supposed to move the front forward, while the defense class are supposed to be, like, sort of in back lines and prevent the enemy team from coming in. So if you think of it like a soccer game or a football game, it's exactly what offense and defense means in those games as well, pushing the front back and forth. While the support classes, they, in their words, were that they could change the tide of the game. So, but they themselves alone are pretty weak. So it's pretty easy to kill any three of these. However, like the importance of the medic, for example, like when you have this one healer and the other team doesn't have their healer on the spot, then you would almost certainly win that fight. And with the spy, you could like do 1 or 2 picks off and then just change how the game is going. If we were to force onto the 4th class that they had, which was the Thief class, it's kind of interesting because these 2 classes are more of the Thief class, the light flank, while also separating that with the Spy, which had invisibility and has a high damage whenever he does get on the other side of the map and shoot backwards towards the front. But yeah, this was how TF2 organized their classes. In Overwatch, though, it's interesting because they had 4 different classes, kind of like how Dungeons and Dragons later on had that 4th class. And their defense, so if we were to apply the Dungeons and Dragons classes onto these with the mage, the fighter, and the clerics, the fighter, or the one that could withstand more damage, would be more like the tanks, while the clerics would be like more of the supports, the ones who could heal. And they kind of divided the offense into 2 different fronts, the offense and defense. So it was kind of confusing because in Team Fortress 2, like defense were more of the tanky characters. However, here now they have their own separate class called the tanks. The roles of defense in Overwatch were actually pretty similar to TF2, where they're trying to hold back the front lines. These characters are known to do like area denial, while offense characters are trying to poke forward and possibly also flank, which is also a job that a thief does. Alright, also wanted to point these out. Whenever Overwatch were designing some of their characters, they also had their role in the team in mind. So you could kind of see like arguably similar body types, especially within the tanks where you have the large bodies, so you can tell that that is a tank. Even if you didn't know who this character is, they look pretty darn tanky because they're large. With the defense characters, they're kind of like all over the place because they all have different roles. They all shut down areas different ways. This guy builds a turret that's almost the same height as he is. She has a sniper rifle. So they all have different weapons. And like a lot of the offense class is almost in 2 different categories. One who could face like forward attack, kind of like the soldier in TF2 with a rocket launcher, could just keep on walking forward. While you have some characters who flank the character from the sides. And you can tell that with their like smaller, nimble bodies. And support, most of them are like small as well. However, they're less like they have different poses that are less aggressive than the offense characters here. Except for Lucio here, but like that's because he's also fast, so you could also see that in his pose. Yeah, and real quickly, Paladins. Paladins also has 4 classes, but this is more similar to what I personally find the Dungeons and Dragons classes, where they literally have a flank class, finally. A class that's basically like the thief in Dungeons and Dragons. It's ancillary. People might say that you don't necessarily need a flank. However, in this game, it's designed so that the flanks are essential because what damage does, usually the offense, like in these kind of games, kill the other characters. However, in Paladins, there's a lot of, there's some mechanics that could allow you to, like say, be invincible for a few seconds, so you could run away with a little sliver of health. And in Paladins, what's interesting is instead of health packs, if you could wait and like not get damaged, you'll automatically heal yourself over time. So it's very important to pick those players off, thus emphasizing this flank class that they have. I was about to show like different body types that they have in Paladins, but there weren't a lot I could find. So like these were like the only 2, and they're both supports. So like it feels like they had a less of an emphasis on like body types when designing these characters, just personally. Because when I first saw this character, I thought he was a tank because he was large, but he's actually a support. So, yeah. Yeah, in conclusion, there's class-based games where classes are different ways you could play the game, and thus you could also contribute to your team in different ways. And finally, there's when these kind of games were evolving, there were a push towards more readable silhouettes, more readable colors, and also looking at how you want to design your game and how you want to design like how the team is going to be composed. So yeah, that's my crappy presentation. So those are my references and any questions. Yeah, my bad. I got really rushed there, but.
No, that
Have
was
you
really good.
played all those games?
No, the funny thing is I've only played Paladins.
Oh.
I honestly have played TF2 for like an hour or so on someone else's computer, but yeah. I know it's super late, so.
That was super well researched. I liked it.
My-
No, that was really good, because I feel like there's a lot of backgrounds to, just game build, obviously.
No.
But, exactly.
Yes.
What's one of the biggest mistakes you've seen in like character design for like not, showing clearly?
Alright, so, alright. Two mistakes that they have. Number one for showing clearly is having that glowing effect. A lot of games such as Battleborn and Overwatch emphasized on glowing stuff. The more important something is, they emanate light, which is the opposite effect what TF2 does, which they try to mute every color down, try to shade everything else down. However, Battleborn and Overwatch has that problem of being almost too bright, so that there's almost everything that's shouting out towards your eyes, such as a shield over there, or like some bullets coming over there. So in terms of character design, I guess with like Paladins, for example, like they had a less emphasis on body type, which is fine, because it's kind of interesting because the way they design their characters are different from how Overwatch designs theirs, because Overwatch kind of starts off with like, especially nowadays when people are calling for new support classes, like, oh, how are we going to make a new support class? And then start making a picture of that. Paladins kind of has like all these other characters, but even if they do call it support, like you could still play those characters as flanks. Because Paladins has this other loadout system that you could change your character, so it does other things. Yeah. The other problem, just small mistake, I guess, people did point out. Thanks for coming, guys. Yeah. The other problem that someone pointed out about Battleborns were just about how the characters were made. Number one, they kind of stretched out anatomy too much. Gigantic also stretches out the anatomy a lot. However, they do it in a much more like cartoony, like clean way. I guess that's just personal preferences. Additionally, a lot of characters in Battleborn people do find to be too generic. Like for example, that's the reason why TF2 kind of went away from just that drunk Scottish person and added just another flavor to him to have like an African descent. But yeah. This was just me babbling on for
No, I think it's important.
Any other questions?
What's your favorite, most iconic character silhouette
Ooh.
that you think is really good?
Well, I feel like Heavy Weapons Guy from TF2 is one of the most recognizable. It's kind of funny because like if you think of like a generic fat man and you'll just think of like, oh yeah, just a round fat guy. But the thing about like TF2 is like since they've been along for so long and they kind of pioneered these kind of cartoony characters. Once you do see some sort of fat man that's bald, you do kind of think of like a lot of people do think of the TF2 heavy. But
Thanks.
Yeah.
I like that.
thanks for listening. Any other comments?
I don't know, it was just something, like a comment about the sort of gender and sort of race representation.
Oh
I
yeah.
know, I mean, I like Overwatch, of course, because it's interesting because every one of the characters has a story.
Mm.
And, there's obviously, like, they try to represent different body types and different, like, cultures. And I noticed, like, early on, obviously, like, 1996, they didn't really, like, do any of it. Like, they're all, like, a bunch of white guys, basically.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. Races and genders, that's like a whole nother can. And honestly, Overwatch is one of those games that really attacks that like full front. They're not afraid to show diversity. Plus they're not trying to like force diversity. It's a thin line trying to be like totally not generic versus considerable to others. But yeah.
I think, like, that helps in terms of having, like, that story or the background story, because then you start to connect. It's almost like part of the kind of recognition, because now you know what this person is all about, right? And so you know their story, and so it becomes more personal. You know the characters based off their story, rather than just their kind of like visual representation, which is, I think, is kind of interesting in terms of this, in terms of the gameplay and actually recognizing like kind of experience of it.
Yeah, that's something that Overwatch really extends from like all the other games. Yeah.
Were you thinking about this when you designed it, Thor?
Honestly, I did see the gigantic talk right before or around when I designed Edge Lord. And gigantic really emphasized on that bold shape. Choose a shape. There's like a character that's almost spherical because everything he has is like a circle. He has like spherical flasks. Yeah. And it's like choose a shape. And even all the animation is like following that shape. So like the circle guy kind of bobs up and down. They say it's like a water balloon. But yeah. Yeah. And Edge.Lord is all triangles.